Hello, this is again Dr. Jonathan Bentovish. I'm recording another important presentation about the New God's Physics Paradigm. This is a book that came out with iUniverse.com and is being translated across the world. As I mentioned, this New God's Physics Paradigm, previously it's been called the Computational Unified Field Theory, honoring Einstein's famous quest for a unifying field theory that would unify between relativity theory and quantum mechanics. And so I'm mentioning the fact that there's been over 60 peer-reviewed articles published. Some are in press right now. Two, now a third special issue coming out in international scientific journals, all recognizing the fact that this new God's physics paradigm is the new scientific paradigm for 21st century theoretical physics and for science more generally. And today's important lecture is God's physics. It's a completely new universe. And everything is not by chance, but rather by personal providence. And so today is also an important date in Hasidic thought, Dida Netzach, and it signifies, in a sense, the victory or the dissemination of the inner teachings of Hasidic thought, Jewish Hasidic thought. And in fact, one of the chapters in this New God's Physics book is the convergence of scientific thought with Hasidic thought. But I want to explain today in what sense the New God's Physics paradigm. I'm going to touch upon the fact that it's there's already initial scientific empirical validation for this new God's physics paradigm is more valid than relativity theory and quantum mechanics, and in fact is including relativity theory and quantum mechanics as special components within this broader new God's physics 21st century scientific paradigm. And really the gist or the focus of this talk is about the fact that this new God's physics paradigm opens our eyes, as the Lubavitcher Rebbe called and is calling all of us to do. But it's opening our eyes to a completely new universe. So let's retrace our steps for those that have not seen and have not read yet this book, this fascinating book. Excuse me. And just highlight the fact that there is a transitioning now between the old material causal paradigm of 20th century physics, that is of relativity theory and quantum mechanics, to the new accepted and acceptable God's physics paradigm. And I explained in the book and in previous presentations that science is not a static science does not find itself in a static situation. Science is a human endeavor, and as such, and because science is seeking to discover truth, ever more accurate appreciations of truth of the physical reality, therefore Thomas Kuhn, the famous philosopher of science, taught science that or discovered that science evolves through leaps and bounds, and essentially there's always through the evolution of science, which may be in a sense likened to a spiral going up, there is or to as I said, to an ever closer and fuller description of truth of the physical reality and what's behind the physical reality. So Thomas Kuhn is teaching us that science evolves by transitioning from periods or phases of standard science, in which a given scientific paradigm, such as Newtonian mechanics, for example, in 19th century physics and before that, was accepted as the way of looking at the world, describing the world, analyzing and investigating the physical reality. So between the standard paradigm and the old standard paradigm, and then there is a transition towards a new paradigm, a newer paradigm, which that new paradigm can resolve major theoretical inconsistencies that appear over time. They appear in the old paradigm, the old standard paradigm, and resolving those theoretical inconsistencies is one requirement for this new paradigm. And the other requirement is that usually when the old paradigm, the old standard paradigm, reaches the limits of its usefulness or is too constrictive to describe the physical reality, I give the metaphor of a person being born in a room, and all that person knows of the world is the confinements of the room, and then something knocks on the window or something pierces the wall, and so that person, that individual, that thought the whole universe, the whole world, as he knew it or she knew it, was only the room. Suddenly, they realize that there's something broader and outside that room. And so they start opening the door and seeing that, yes, the room exists, but the room is only a confinement within, or a small part within the broader reality of the house. And then the house expands into the neighborhood, into the city, into the country, etc. That's, in a sense, a simile for the evolution of science, as Thomas Kuhn describes it. And so we are transitioning. So in the case historically, just to make that point clear, historically, when we look at, for example, Einstein's great revolution of relativity theory, general relativity theory, just over 100 years ago, we find that Einstein's back then, 20th century new relativity theory paradigm, that new paradigm was able to resolve the theoretical inconsistencies between Newtonian mechanics, classical mechanics, and Maxwellian electromagnetic theory. Relativity theory, the new paradigm of 20th century physics, was able to resolve a major unexplained phenomenon of the ether concept, which was purely hypothetical, was assumed to be a very fine element perfusing the universe, was very essential for Newtonian mechanics, but yet could not be found, could not be explained. And so Einstein's back then new relativity theory paradigm was able to resolve the apparent inconsistencies between classical mechanics and Maxwellian theory, was able to discard the ether concept as superfluous. That was part of Einstein's genius, that he said, if you cannot find it, then you have to discard it. Science cannot remain for long in a situation where there is a major element, major assumption that cannot be verified empirically. And essentially, and by the way, in 1919, when Eddington, the famous British philosopher, astronomer, was able to verify that indeed one of the critical predictions of Einstein's theory about the double-valued pathway or perihelion pathway curvature around the sun of Mercury, when he was able to prove that that was the case, this was a critical prediction of Einstein's general relativity theory, and when he was able to prove that that's the case and that's more valid than the predictions of Newtonian mechanics, overnight relativity theory or general relativity theory became the acceptable new paradigm for 20th century physics and advanced humanity's understanding of the universe, its origin, etc. tremendously. The thing is, though, Einstein, the great, one of the two greatest geniuses the world has ever known. So when Einstein, after he discovered relativity theory and began quantum mechanics, other scientists joined, and Einstein was not completely satisfied with the end result of quantum mechanics. He said that quantum mechanics is not wrong, but it's incomplete, and he was looking for this unifying field theory that could again advance science, because he realized that 20th century physics also began reaching the limits of its usefulness. And he was looking for this unifying field theory. And in a sense, Einstein was not just a genius, he was a visionary scientist. It's well known that many of his ideas, even now, even 100 years after his after the discovery of general relativity theory and the validation of general relativity theory in 1919, 100 years later, there are certain discoveries, even Nobel Prize awarded discoveries, that are essentially fulfilling Einstein's ideas. And also, by the way, his quest for this unifying field theory, I regard it as a visionary understanding that there must exist such a unifying field theory, and that's why I called this new paradigm of 21st century theoretical physics, now it's called God's physics, but previously I called it the computational unified field theory, in great respect for this great visionary scientist. And so we stand now, so Einstein was looking for such a unifying field theory, realized that a situation in which there is a basic contradiction or a theoretical inconsistency between relativity theory and quantum mechanics cannot stand. And this situation has become worse because over the last 20 years, the last 2 decades, a major phenomenon somewhat similar or actually equivalent to the ether concept, which we spoke about, somewhat similar to the ether concept that we spoke about, that was purely hypothetical, elusive, could not be detected. And Einstein, the great Einstein, discarded the ether and regarded it as superfluous, and that led him to the discovery of the new, back then new paradigm of relativity theory. And what happened with God's physics new paradigm is very similar, because as I said, the crisis, paradigmatic crisis of the now old material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics. The crisis has become intensified over the last 2 decades because there is a purely hypothetical concept which is called the dark matter, dark energy concepts that are major for the old material causal paradigm, in the same way that the ether concept was major, was key or essential for the old Newtonian mechanics paradigm. So these dark matter, dark energy, purely hypothetical concepts have been now intensively searched for over the past 20 years, 2 decades, and they cannot be found. And they're assumed to comprise up to 95% of all the mass and energy in the universe, but yet they cannot be found. And that, as we said, and as Einstein, the great scientist, the great genius, realized that science cannot remain for long in a situation that it cannot account, it cannot explain that major phenomena, in this case up to 95% of all the mass and energy in the universe cannot be accounted for, because they're hypothesized to comprise this dark matter, dark energy, purely hypothetical concepts, but they cannot be identified. And so I mentioned the fact, it's an alarming sign that Scientific American, a key international scientific journal, had an article recently whose title was "The Last Stand of Dark Matter and Dark Energy." And essentially that says, or that recognizes, the scientific community recognizes the fact that science cannot remain in this situation, that the dark matter, dark energy, either they will be identified, which I highly doubt, or they have to be discarded, which is what I did. One of those 60 peer-reviewed scientific articles that I've written and were published, the title was "Could Dark Matter, Dark Energy Be Superfluous?" i.e. non-existent. And so now we're actually standing at a historic point. Before I describe the completely new universe that we live in and the exciting times that we're passing through, I just want to highlight the fact that we are at a historic time, a turning point, a paradigmatic shift from the old material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics to the new God's physics, a causal computation paradigm. And in a nutshell, first of all, the old paradigm basic assumption is that the world, the universe, every phenomenon in the universe operates by cause and effect, material causality. As an example, Einstein's general relativity theory, Einstein's equations, the manifestation of Einstein's general relativity theory and Einstein's equations in the Big Bang model, which assumes that the universe has been created by an initial nuclear event that caused the creation of suns, galaxies, mass, energy, space, etc., and even the expansion, the initial expansion of the universe is assumed to have risen from this initial nuclear Big Bang event. That's all based on the assumption that everything in the universe operates by cause and effect. So an initial nuclear event causes the creation of suns, galaxies, mass, energy, and the expansion of the universe. That's a cause and effect, or a material causal assumption. Quantum mechanics on the subatomic realm also is based on the same material causal assumption, which essentially assumes that every subatomic realm phenomenon, every subatomic target element and all of its features can only be determined as a cause and effect process, or as arising from a cause and effect in a direct physical interaction. In other words, the quantum mechanics realm is based on the assumption that any measurements, any phenomenon in subatomic phenomenon or subatomic target element can be detected and can be explained and operates by its direct physical interaction with the corresponding subatomic probe element. So the basic assumption is that we have a subatomic target element which is really dispersed along a probability wave function, and when that target element's probability wave function directly interacts with the corresponding subatomic probe, that causes the collapse, quote unquote, of the subatomic target's probability wave function into a single complementary space, energy, time, mass value. And so that's also a cause and effect, the interaction between subatomic probe and subatomic target's probability wave function causes the collapse of this target's probability wave function into a singular value, complementary value. But that's also a cause and effect material causality assumption. And perhaps the key discovery of this new God's physics, computational unified field theory, a new paradigm for 21st century science, the key discovery of this new paradigm, new God's physics paradigm, is that there exists a singular higher ordered universal computational / consciousness principle. That universal consciousness principle or computational principle, the UCP, is simultaneously computing every spatial pixel in the universe. And that simultaneous computation of every spatial pixel in the universe, first it occurs at an incredible rate of c squared divided by Planck's constant, which gives us about 1.36 in the power of minus 50. So that's many trillions of times per second that essentially this UCP is creating a series of frames. Each frame comprises the whole universe, all the spatial pixels of the universe, and it's computed simultaneously. Between one frame and a consecutive or a subsequent frame, the whole universe dissolves back into this UCP. And so the universe is really not a static phenomenon. It's really being created, dissolved, recreated, and evolved as a series of universal frames. Quite amazing discovery. And it also has tremendous theoretical ramifications. One of these ramifications is the fact that we call it, I called it the acausal computation paradigm, because the minute that we realize that the UCP simultaneously computes all the spatial pixels in the universe for each frame, each consecutive frame, and that the universe dissolves back into its source, into this UCP in between frames, there cannot be any cause and effect interaction, contrary to the assumption of the old material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics. There cannot exist any direct or indirect material causal physical interactions between any two or more spatial pixels in the universe. There cannot be any physical interactions, cause and effect physical interactions, either within any given frame or across the frames. Because within any given frame, since all the spatial pixels are computed simultaneously, there cannot be any interaction. I gave again and again this metaphor, but it's a good metaphor for the general public, that if we had a cup, a glass cup, and we had a hammer, and the cup was filled with a liquid, a water or tea in this case, and you'd have a hammer, you'd see a film in which the hammer is hitting the glass cup and supposedly breaking the glass cup, and the tea is being poured over the table. For the naked eye, without investigation, we would say there's a cause and effect, because the hammer is hitting the glass cup, it's causing the shattering of the glass cup, and therefore the tea is being spilled, or the water is being spilled. But when we slow down the progression of the film and we see that in any given frame they're presented simultaneously, we realize, even when they're touching upon each other, they're presented simultaneously. We realize that there cannot be any cause and effect because they're presented simultaneously. So there's rather a presentation of an arrangement of a series of frames in which those two objects become closer and closer until they touch upon each other. But that arrangement of the film gives us the perception as if there's cause and effect, but really there's no cause and effect. There's just an arrangement of the film frames by the producer of the film that gives us the appearance, or the illusion, you may say, of cause and effect. And I gave this cinematic film metaphor. I used, by the way, the cinematic film metaphor for multiple explanations of this new theory. But specifically here, it actually negates, or it explains to us, that there cannot be really any cause and effect in this new acausal computational paradigm. And so this is a turning point in science, because instead of explaining the universe as being created by an initial Big Bang, the Big Bang model collapses or is negated based on this new God's physics paradigm. There could not have been any cause and effect even in the first frame, or the second frame, or third frame. There could not have been any transference of material effects between the first frame and the second frame and the billionth frame, etc. Rather, the UCP, which is likened to the producer of the film, the Universal Computational / Consciousness Principle, the UCP, is producing and has produced a series of universal frames that gives us the illusion or the perception as if the universe is evolving and progressing by cause and effect. So that's a major discovery, and it's a quite shocking realization at the beginning that the universe really. And then let me speak about the other two major concepts, and then we'll speak about the fact that this new God's physics 21st century paradigm allows us to open our eyes and realize that we live in a completely new universe. So the other two postulates that are perhaps would assist us in realizing this tremendous change in 21st century theoretical physics and science more generally. One is two postulates that I called the computational invariance principle and the universal consciousness reality. These two theoretical postulates essentially tell us that since the only thing that remains constant both during the frames, the universal frames, as computing every spatial pixel in the universe, and in between the frames, in which the universe dissolves into this UCP, and only the UCP remains existent, the only thing that is constant and continuous and uniform, in a sense, the only real reality, is this universal consciousness principle or consciousness reality, UCP or UCR, because that's the only thing that remains constant both during the frames, in which it computes every spatial pixel in the universe and its four basic physical features of space, energy, time, and mass, and also remains solely without the presence of the physical universe in between two frames. So the computational invariance principle essentially tells us that since the only thing that remains constant is this UCP or UCR, that's the only reality. Excuse me. And really, the physical universe is that's the second postulate of the universal conscious reality that I mentioned, and the physical universe, with all its beauty and complexity, the entire physical universe is really only a manifestation, a transient, temporary, a phenomenal manifestation of this real reality of the universal conscious reality. That's a tremendous change in our view of the universe. The universe stops or stops being viewed, ceases to be viewed as a solid, material, continuous reality. It's not. The universe is being created, dissolved, recreated, and evolved so many trillions of times per second, and we realize that it's only manifestation of this higher ordered, singular, universal conscious reality. So that's one major discovery, and we start realizing that we have to look at the universe in a completely different way. And alongside with that, and this is perhaps, but before I just go into the major highlight of this presentation, which is that we live in a completely new universe, let me just close the circle, so to speak, and just explain that really now we stand at an equivalent point to where science was 100 years ago, when Eddington verified the critical prediction of Einstein's general relativity theory. I mentioned that earlier, and we said that the minute that Einstein was able to identify at least one critical prediction that differentiated between his general relativity theory and Newtonian mechanics or classical mechanics, that was about the double-valued curvature of Mercury around the Sun. And the minute that critical prediction was verified by Eddington, at that point science and scientists had to accept and embrace the new 20th century paradigm of relativity theory as valid, as more valid than Newtonian mechanics. And in fact, Newtonian mechanics became a special case within the broader understanding of general relativity theory. And I always like to mention or quote Einstein's humble and really a great foresight statement when he was asked, does he think that his relativity theory would remain valid in 100 years or forever? And he said no. He said no. I'm convinced that relativity theory, general relativity theory, even though it's considered to be the single greatest intellectual achievement of any single human being, he said, I'm convinced that this relativity theory would not be valid in 100 years, but I only hope, he said, that it will become a special case within a broader understanding. And that's exactly what's happening right now, because God's physics, I'll explain this in a second, God's physics includes relativity theory and quantum mechanics as special cases, special elements within its broader understanding. But I just want to highlight the fact that in the same way that Eddington verified a critical prediction of Einstein's general relativity theory, thereby leading the scientific community and science in general to embrace relativity theory as the new valid scientific paradigm for 20th century physics, in the same way, now science has to embrace and is beginning to embrace the new God's physics paradigm as the new 21st century scientific paradigm, due to precisely an equivalent empirical validation of the two critical predictions of this new God's physics paradigm. I won't go into detail, into much detail, but I'll just mention, as I did in more elaborately in previous presentations, and in these 60 peer-reviewed scientific articles and keynote opening lectures in multiple scientific conferences, physics conferences. So there's two empirical validations of two critical predictions of unique critical predictions of this new God's physics paradigm. And those are, one, about the non-continuous accelerated expansion rate of the universe, one of the, as I mentioned earlier, one of the key problems, key alarming signs of the old material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics is the accelerated expansion of the universe. We know that the galaxies are drifting apart and they're becoming more and more distant. The rate of the acceleration of the universe is becoming is increasing. So there's an accelerated rate of the universe's expansion. But the problem is that this accelerated rate of the universe's expansion, the only way that the old material causal paradigm can explain that is through those purely hypothetical dark matter and dark energy concepts, which are assumed to comprise 95% of the universe's energy and mass, but cannot be detected, and therefore they have to be discarded. The new God's physics paradigm has a critical prediction, which is different than those dark matter, dark energy, purely hypothetical concepts. And this new critical prediction is that there will be a non-continuous leap or changes in the universe's accelerated expansion, which is associated with one of the other postulates of this new God's physics paradigm, which is called the collective human consciousness focus. And essentially the idea is that anytime that you have a collective human consciousness focus, millions of individuals or a large group of human beings all focusing on this universal consciousness reality. In religious terms we call it God. In scientific terms we call it the universal consciousness reality, or UCP. So anytime that you have a collective human consciousness focusing on this UCP or UCR, the new God's physics paradigm tells us or predicts that there will be a non-continuous leap, change, increase in the rate of the universe's expansion rate, or accelerated rate of expansion. There will be an increase in that accelerated rate of expansion. So this non-continuous accelerated rate of expansion is a unique prediction of God's physics paradigm, and specifically is postulated that it occurs during, or can be measured, these increases, non-continuous leaps, could be measured and identified during collective human consciousness focus intervals, such as the Jewish new Rosh Hashanah New Year 2 days time interval. So I called cosmologists and astronomers to test over the past Rosh Hashanah on the 7th and 8th of September 2021. Excuse me, I called cosmologists and astronomers to test the non-continuous accelerated rate of expansion of the universe. So far I've not received results. I'm still waiting for results to come in. But in any event, there is an initial empirical validation, regardless of the last Rosh Hashanah or those specific measurements. There is already an initial empirical validation of this non-continuous accelerated of the universe's expansion, which is given by the major riddle in cosmology today, which is the gap between the early stage universe background radiation cosmological value of the universe's accelerated expansion and the contemporary astronomical higher value of the universe's accelerated expansion. There's a gap, and that unexplained gap, which is essentially a non-continuous increase in the universe's accelerated rate of expansion, precisely confirming God's physics critical prediction. That is already validated. That supplies an initial empirical validation for this unique critical prediction of God's physics paradigm regarding the non-continuous accelerated rate of expansion of the universe, that gap. So that's also, it's been published several times now. That's one critical empirical validation of one critical prediction of God's physics paradigm. The second empirical validation of God's physics new paradigm, critical prediction, has to do with what I call the proton radius puzzle. And the proton radius puzzle essentially is a situation or phenomenon, unexplained phenomenon, cannot be explained by the old material causal paradigm of relativity theory and quantum mechanics. That's a phenomenon in which a hydrogen atom, we compare between a standard hydrogen atom that has the electron negatively charged particle encircling the nucleus and the proton within it. We compare that to an altered hydrogen atom, a muon altered hydrogen atom, in which the electron negatively charged particle was replaced by a muon, more massive but also negatively charged particle. And we find, and scientists found over the last 10 years, even longer, from 2010, they found that it's called the proton radius puzzle, because when we measure the radius of the proton of this hydrogen atom in the muon replaced atom, hydrogen atom, and we compare the radius of the proton in the muon hydrogen relative to the standard hydrogen, we find that in the muon case, muon hydrogen, the proton, which is affected by the muon, the proton radius decreases significantly, is significantly smaller, and that cannot be explained by the old quantum mechanics model of the old material causal paradigm, but it can be explained, and actually has been predicted, is identical to the prediction of God's physics' unique critical prediction regarding the fact that, and I'm opening here brackets, the new God's physics paradigm has a completely new way of looking and explaining the four basic physical features of space, energy, mass, and time. And the way that the new model explains space, energy, mass, and time is essentially saying that the UCP, when it computes simultaneously every exhaustive spatial pixel in the universe, it computes the degree of change or lack of change, consistency or inconsistency pertaining to any object in the universe, and it computes that consistency or inconsistency across a series of frames relative to the whole frame or relative to the composition of an object. So the UCP has three, and more specifically two, relevant UCP computational dimensions of framework and consistency, and then there's locus, which is less relevant right now for us. But consistency and framework dimensions, each one of them has two levels. The consistency has consistent and inconsistent. The frame has frame and object, again, whether the UCP computes the degree of consistency relative to the entire frame, the positioning of a certain object relative to the entire frame, or whether the UCP computes the consistency or lack of consistency pertaining to the composition of a given object across frames. And that gives us the four possible combinations of consistent, inconsistent, frame, object levels, gives us the four basic physical features of space, energy, mass, and time. So frame consistent UCP's computation would give us space, frame inconsistent would give us energy, object consistent would give us mass, object inconsistent would give us time. So these four basic physical features are computed simultaneously by the UCP for all exhaustive spatial pixels in the universe. That, by the way, in and of itself is so shocking, is so so much beyond our imagination of the complexity and the infinity and the intelligence of this UCP, being capable of computing simultaneously all the spatial pixels in the universe, for each one of them simultaneously, the four basic physical features of space, energy, mass, and time. That's unfathomable, but still, that's the new paradigm, and it tells us the infinite nature and intelligence and capacity of this universal consciousness reality. But this was in brackets just to explain that the proton radius puzzle can be explained by this new God's physics paradigm simply because the UCP computes simultaneously those four basic physicals of space, time, energy, and mass, and specifically now the mass physical feature is computed, as we said, as object consistent computation of the UCP. And therefore the prediction, the critical prediction of God's physics new paradigm tells us that a more massive object or particle, such as the muon, would be computed as more spatially consistent across frames. And that's exactly what's been observed in the findings of this proton radius puzzle that the more massive muon particle, which is affecting the proton of that hydrogen atom, so the proton would be measured as more spatially consistent due to the greater mass of the muon, which essentially signifies that the UCP is computing as more spatially consistent this massive muon particle relative to the lighter electron particle. So we obtain now a second empirical validation of essentially two critical predictions of this new God's physics paradigm. And therefore, we stand at the historic point, or point in time, turning point of science, because it's equivalent to Eddington's verification of Einstein's general relativity theory as more valid in that case than Newtonian mechanics. These two initial empirical validations of two critical predictions of God's physics paradigm essentially forces science to accept God's physics paradigm as the new scientific paradigm for 21st century physics as more valid than relativity theory and quantum mechanics. It's just important for me to highlight the fact that this new God's physics paradigm does not, it replicates relativistic and quantum phenomenon such as the dilation of time for relativistic objects and curvature. It has a different explanation of the curvature of space-time, but it does replicate all the major findings of relativity theory and quantum mechanics. But it includes relativity theory and quantum mechanics as special cases within this broader generalization, just as Einstein predicted. And so, one last word about this thing, this major breakthrough and acceptance of this new paradigm as the new scientific paradigm for 21st century physics, which embeds within it the older or the old material causal elements of relativity theory and quantum mechanics. And truly at the center of this new God's physics paradigm, there is what I call the universal computational formula, which describes the manner in which the UCP simultaneously creates the universe, dissolves the universe so many trillions of times per second, and within that universal computational formula, which recently has been expanded, maybe I'll say a word about this, but within this universal computational formula, there is a complete unification of space, energy, mass, and time for the first time in physics. Einstein's general relativity theory was only capable of unifying between space, space and time, which is the four-dimensional continuum of space-time, energy and mass, which is the energy and mass equivalence, E equals mc squared, and the curvature of space-time by massive objects. But it was not able to unify completely between those four basic physical features of space, energy, time, and mass, which in this new God's physics paradigm, at the heart of this new God's physics paradigm, there is the universal computational formula, which does unify these four basic physical features for the first time in physics and in science, which is a major discovery, major advancement of our understanding of the physical universe. But it also includes relativistic and quantum elements as special cases within this new understanding. So it includes Heisenberg uncertainty principles, complementary pairs of space, energy, time, and mass, and their connection. It includes the energy mass equivalency equals mc squared. There's actually two formats of this universal computational formula that I call them the relativistic format, the quantum format, which highlight the fact that relativity theory and quantum mechanics appear as special cases within this broader understanding. So I think now we're reaching the point of realizing, first we realize that God's physics is being accepted as the new scientific paradigm, valid scientific paradigm for 21st century physics, more valid than relativity theory and quantum mechanics, includes relativity theory and quantum mechanics as special cases. And we're ready now to speak about the completely new universe that we discover, or that God's physics new paradigm discovers. It's a completely new and exciting universe that we live in. So I'll explain this in a few steps. First of all, because we realized God's physics new paradigm discovered that the universe is not a static phenomenon. It was not created by initial Big Bang nuclear event. It's actually being created and recreated and dissolved many trillions of times per second by this singular higher ordered universal conscious reality. So we realize the universe is just a manifestation of this singular higher ordered universal conscious reality. And therefore, we also start realizing that the evolution of the universe cannot be explained. Neither the creation of the universe, there was a negation of the Big Bang model, so neither the creation of the universe nor the evolution of the universe cannot be explained by material causal interactions. So in a sense, it's the new God's physics acausal computational paradigm negates the Einstein's equations material causal assumption. It negates the idea that the universe evolves by cause and effect. It's not massive objects curving space and time. That's an appearance. It's really the computation of the UCP of a series of frames, which gives us the perception of the curvature of space-time by massive objects. And I explained this in detail in a few of the articles. It's not dark matter, dark energy that are pushing and expelling the universe, pushing the universe apart. It's not dark matter and dark energy that are pushing the universe apart. It's the UCP that's actually creating for each consecutive universal frame. It's expanding. It's adding a certain number of spatial pixels. So it's creating each time each consecutive frame is a little bit larger than the previous one, and that gives us the accelerated rate of expansion. And specifically, that has to be the specific prediction about the collective human consciousness focus non-continuous increases still has to be verified empirically. But as we said, there's already an initial empirical validation for the non-continuity of the accelerated rate of the universe's expansion. So the universe was not created by a Big Bang, is not evolving by direct interaction between massive objects and space-time and the curvature of space-time, is not expanding, is not accelerated the expansion of the universe by dark matter, dark energy. The major player and the only reality really behind the universe is this higher ordered singular universal consciousness reality. And so the way that this new God's physics paradigm views the world and the universe is that the universe is being evolved basically or fundamentally based on a pre-planned ultimate goal of the universe's evolution, that the universal conscious reality has had and is evolving the universe based on its initial plan and ultimate goal for the universe's evolution. And I gave the metaphor. I said, if we thought about King Solomon, the wisest of men, and we thought about him, and we imagined that King Solomon wanted to build, and he actually built the second temple. So before he built the second temple, this immaculate temple, he would have a plan, and he had a blueprint of how this temple would look like. And if we took a palace or this example about the temple, we know that there had to be a blueprint plan for the construction of this temple. And before the builders even started putting the first block of stone to create this immaculate temple, they could not do anything before there was a complete plan, a blueprint plan for how this temple would look like. And in somewhat the same manner, this is a metaphor, but the universal conscious reality has and had to have an ultimate goal for the universe's evolution. The ultimate goal of the universe's for the universe's creation and evolution is what I call the Geula goal, perfected state. The Geula is a term taken from Jewish and Hasidic thought, and it signifies a perfected state. And so the Geula goal the Geula, perfected ultimate state of the universe, is the goal that the universal conscious reality has created the universe for this ultimate goal fulfillment, and is continuously evolving the universe towards that perfected goal. So in other words, the evolution of the universe from inanimate matter through animate animals, human beings, and this perfected Geula state of humanity, this is the whole progression, and this is the whole plan towards this ultimate Geula goal state. And let me say a few words about this Geula state, which is very relevant for us. That's part of this completely new universe that we're entering and viewing, and part of what the inspiration of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, that is telling humanity to open our eyes and see the real reality. That's where science now is converging with Hasidic thought. And by personal providence, I'm delivering this important lecture in a day which signifies the dissemination of Hasidic thought across the world. But in any event, the idea is that the perfected Geula state of the world, the perfected Geula state, is a state in which humanity and science would recognize the singularity of the universal conscious reality, i.e. God in religious terms. So science now is realizing that there's only one reality, as we said. This is the universal conscious reality, which exists both in between the frames and during the frames. And the perfected state, the perfected Geula state of the universe, is a state in which there would be moral perfection, spiritual perfection, and physical perfection. I can't get into all the details, but one of the key elements of this new God's physics paradigm, which is relevant for this new universe that we're living in, and opening our eyes to realize, is the moral principle. And this universal conscious reality has a moral principle, essentially highlighting the fact that because there's only one reality, this universal conscious reality, because there's only one reality, and that reality, universal conscious reality, is unified, it also possesses a moral principle. In other words, saying that all human beings, and in fact everything in the universe, is part of this universal conscious reality. For human beings, for us human beings possessing the most expansive form of consciousness, and the only ones that have a moral free choice ability. So the moral principle of this universal conscious reality, and essential element within this Geula state, perfected state of the universe, the ultimate goal of the universe's evolution, the moral principle essentially teaches humanity that we're all inseparable, and so that in fact within this new God's physics paradigm, we've discovered that the UCR, universal conscious reality, possesses a multi-spatial temporal reservoir of all past, present, and multiple possible futures, universal frames for each individual human being. Based on our moral choices that we're making every moment, the universal consciousness principle or reality is selecting for each individual human being one of multiple possible futures based on our moral choices. I gave the metaphor or the example in the book, in the God's Physics book, of in that case, just to make it very illustrative, of a CEO driving in his car to an annual meeting. In that annual meeting, he's supposed to get an annual prize or bonus for his achievements, and lo and behold, on his way from his house in the hills, private house, in his new car, he stops and he sees that there is God forbid, a car accident, and there is a person injured, bleeding, God forbid, and needs to be evacuated to a hospital. And that's assuming, of course, that CEO is qualified to handle that person. But then he has a moral choice, because the moral choice he has is whether he's going to actually do the right thing, which is assuming that he can handle and treat cautiously that injured person. He has a choice whether to take that injured person to the hospital and rush him to the hospital, canceling his meeting, perhaps dirtying his the cushions in his car, but saving a person's life, which is far more important. In Jewish thought, we say that that a person that saves another person's life saves the whole world. So he has this moral choice of saving that person's life, or trying to save that person's life, or ignoring and giving some excuse for not being able to do that, but essentially choosing to rush to the important meeting that he has. And I give this metaphor because I say that this, according to this metaphor or this example, the universal consciousness reality would choose for that CEO one of multiple possible futures. If he chose to try and rescue that person's life, the universal conscious reality would also choose one of multiple possible futures in which his life could be spared or could be saved, and vice versa. And so the moral principle becomes now a major element within this Geula perfected state, and really the moral principle is one of the mechanisms, so to speak, that the universal conscious reality is employing to lead humanity towards that perfected Geula state. And so the perfected Geula state is a state in which science and humanity recognizes the oneness of creation, the singular reality of this universal conscious reality, the fact that we're inseparable from it, the fact that this universal conscious reality has a moral principle and it's a moral universe, and the realization that the whole evolution of the universe from inanimate matter through animate plants, animals, and human beings is leading and has led to this perfected Geula state, which really we're at the brink and the beginning of this Geula state, because science now is realizing the singularity of this universal conscious reality. Science now is realizing, or is starting to discover and validate, the fact that the universe is not expanding based on any material causal interactions, but is expanding and is evolving based on this singularity of the universal conscious reality. So we live in a completely new universe. This new universe tells us that nothing in the universe happens by chance. In Hasidic thought, we call it personal providence, hashgacha pratit. But that means that the universal conscious reality is really the only element, the only driving force behind the universe, and our moral choices are part of this evolution of the universe. So we start living in a completely new universe because we start realizing that the evolution of the universe is guided, is cared for by this universal conscious reality. It's guiding the universe, guiding humanity towards a perfected state. The universe is not a chaotic and random appearance. By the way, it negated Darwin's natural selection principle, the idea that the species have evolved just by chance, genetic mutations or interactions between a specific organism genetically mutated and a challenging environment. It's not the case. And it's not the case where everything in the world happens by chance. No, actually the universe is being cared for, is being guided, is being evolved by this universal conscious reality, and our moral choices are very important. Once we start realizing that our moral choices impact both our personal future and also are an important part in the evolution of the universe towards a perfected Geula state, it changes our perspective of life and of our understanding of the universe. So it's a completely new universe. It's a universe that is moral. It's a universe that is guided by the universal conscious reality towards a perfected state. It's a universe in which our moral choices make a big difference for our lives, our future occurrences. By the way, within this new paradigm, there is now a recently in-press article, The Power of Tshuva. Tshuva is the capacity of a human being to make a conscious regret and resolution regarding negative moral choices that we made, asking forgiveness from the person that we, God forbid, inflicted pain or sorrow, and making a resolution, a conscious resolution not to repeat that. That's teshuva in Jewish tradition, and it's now a term in this new God's physics paradigm, again signifying the fact that our choices and our ability to make teshuvah changes not only our future, but changes the whole world. And maybe I'll just end this presentation by giving a quote of Maimonides, considered one of the greatest sages, philosophers, and Jewish leaders. Maimonides said that every moment a person, an individual, can tilt and change their own situation, their own moral standing, and by that also changing the situation and the moral standing of the whole world by a moral choice. So Maimonides said that every individual through their own choices can tilt themselves and the world to a better situation, to a perfected state. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the leader of the Jewish people, is also encouraging us and telling us that every small moral step that we take, every good moral deed that we make, every mitzvah, every Jewish commandment that we're fulfilling advances ourselves and the world towards a perfected state. The Rebbe called all of humanity, Jews and non-Jews, to contribute to this moral perfection of the world. For non-Jews, there are the 7 Noach commandments, which are also moral inclinations and commandments to perfect the world. And so we're standing at the point where science converges with religious Hasidic thought. Science is realizing that the world is really a part of this universal consciousness reality. And just as Maimonides and the great Lubavitcher Rebbe is calling us both to open our eyes and realize the reality that there's only one reality, this universal conscious reality, religious terms God, and that this reality is moral and that our choices make a big difference in the world. We live in a completely new universe. Thank you very much.